This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufahl, joined today by Walter Haydock from StackAware. We're going to spend a little bit of time, I think, talking. Actually, as we have recently, AI-related content, but in this case, more on the compliance and sort of standards space, where we'll talk about ISO 42001. So, Walter, thanks for joining. I appreciate taking some time today.
Jason, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So, I'm going to come totally clean. I wouldn't say I had my sights set on 42001 until 3-4 weeks ago when you and I met and chatted about it for a few minutes, and I realized, well, all right, like we've got some formalization in the security practices relative to AI, and it seems so relevant because I spend a lot of time talking about AI use cases and AI risk and some of the things around that, but we haven't really talked about what's out there to help people actually determine how to protect themselves, how to write policies, right? Whatever 42001 looks like. So if you could spend a minute on who StackAware is, what your background is, and then we'll kind of dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founder of StackAware, and we help AI-powered companies measure and manage cybersecurity, compliance, and privacy risk. We primarily focus on implementing the ISO 42001 standard for our customers to prepare them for external audit and certification. And we work with a range of companies, but primarily in the health tech, fintech, and B2B SaaS space.
Okay. So what is how comprehensive is 42001? What is it? Is it like anything you've seen before?
ISO 42001 is an international standard for building an AI management system. It's very similar in structure to ISO 27001, which is focused on information security management systems. And it is a relatively high-level document that has a variety of different supporting resources that can give you implementation guidance. But essentially, it requires that you build a governance program to help you measure and manage the risk and impacts external to the organization of using artificial intelligence. It requires you to have an internal audit program. It requires effective measurement and monitoring of key performance indicators. And it requires you to interact with your customers, your suppliers, and interested third parties in a certain way, in a structured manner, to make sure that you are meeting your own requirements and managing the risk effectively.
So I'm interested in this. This is always a question for me when you talk about some of these frameworks. Is it a set of best practices, or is it also, and I'm sure to some degree it is, but is it certifiable? Can you have a third party actually say you've done the things in 42001 to give you some public way of saying I adhere to or I are certified against 42001?
ISO 42001 is an externally certifiable standard. For example, StackAware itself is ISO 42001 certified, and you can have an external auditor come in and grant you a certification after reviewing your AI management system. It is a prescriptive standard. It does require you do certain things in certain ways. But with that said, it is flexible enough so that a small company like StackAware can get certified, but also a big company like Amazon Web Services can also get certified using ISO 42001.
So what is an AI management system? Is that what you referred to it as? Describe that for a second. So, if I'm a company that's using Copilot, I've got 10 employees, we've got Copilot deployed. Would I need to look at 42001, or is it for somebody who's developing AI products? Like, where is the requirement to try to adhere to this?
ISO 42001 falls into a broader environment or ecosystem of ISO documentation, one of which is ISO 22989, which lays out 6 different AI roles. And 3 of them are probably not too germane to the conversation. They relate to data subjects and regulators. But where most companies would be focused would be on the AI provider, the AI producer, and the AI user roles. So companies that are AI users are like those that you mentioned who would be using third-party tools like Copilot or ChatGPT. An AI provider is generally a company that we might describe as AI powered. Maybe they're building a product on top of a third-party service. And then AI producers are most likely those that are building and training foundational models for their customers. There are some tweaks, there are some asterisks there. Interestingly enough, StackAware is certified as an AI producer because one of the subcategories is governance, is a governance and oversight organization. So that is included in our scope for ISO 42001.
Okay. So I think kind of knowing our listeners generally, most probably fall into the AI users space. At least I would think that they would. Uh, can you spend a second on what types of things would 42001 call out relative to companies that primarily have AI users in them?
For companies that are using AI purely in a productized manner, ISO 42001 gives you a variety of things. So first of all, it gives you a foundation for conducting AI risk assessments, which is obviously critical for any organization that's using a third-party service. So understanding data retention, training policies, accuracy issues, these are all key for any organization that's using AI. Additionally, it gives you a way to explain externally to stakeholders like customers, regulators, what have you, that you're using artificial intelligence in a responsible and structured manner, and that you have a program to monitor how it is being rolled out. And I'm happy to give you some examples of companies
Yeah,
that would benefit from ISO 42001
yeah,
certification.
that'd be great.
So the three types of companies that would be most appropriate for ISO 42001 certification would be one, AI powered startups, because these types of companies, like mine, for example, have limited bandwidth. They can probably only go for one framework to begin with. And ISO 42001 is actually quite a broad framework. It covers things like security and privacy, but it also covers more general topics like impacts on climate change, for example, as well as impacts on societies and individuals. So it is a very broad standard. Second of all, would be organizations that are training on customer data. And for example, DocuSign, Slack, Zoom have all kind of gotten into a little bit of PR hot water from the way they rolled out some terms and conditions changes or how they're training their products. And whether or not they deserve that scrutiny is a different question, but they got it nonetheless. So giving people a warm and fuzzy, so to speak, about how you're using AI with ISO 42001 is definitely a way to go. And then the third group of organizations that would benefit most from ISO 42001 would be health tech and financial services organizations, specifically those that are heavily regulated, that have an obligation to respond to audit requests, to provide information to regulators who are keenly interested in how the organization is using artificial intelligence. And because AI is relatively new, especially for those who would be conducting audits from the government side or from the regulator side, having a structured framework that you're basing your usage on would be an inherently defensible way to go.
Uh, so I'm interested since you mentioned that StackAware went through the process. Um, how did that process feel? Given that 42,000, sure, given that AI is reasonably new, I would imagine the auditors are kind of wrestling a little bit with maybe consistency or repeatability of the way they audit against this, or did it feel, uh, you know, structured and organized and mature?
I've had several podcasts with my auditor and with other auditors as well. So, we've actually, I think, had a really good discussion about this, and they've been very transparent that, things are evolving and the standards that they are looking for, the things that are top of mind for them are changing as the technologies change. So I think that the practice is evolving. Absolutely, I don't think we are where we potentially could be, and I think most auditors would agree. Which optimally, an audit would take the form of a human scoping out a series of requirements and systems and personnel, and then basically confirming that the scope is correct, and then pushing a button and firing a bunch of APIs that interrogate data sets, and then those send back the results, and then you can confirm or deny whether you are in compliance with your requirements. So optimally, that's what would happen in a perfect world if everyone were, perfectly coordinated and disciplined and the technology is certainly there. It's just a matter of organization that's the issue. So we're not quite there yet. I think we may get somewhere near there in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Um, so for somebody that goes through the process, uh, and I'm sure you do this pretty regularly. What are the types of things that maybe are surprises or unexpected hurdles for companies to overcome? Like for example, it comes to mind. I would imagine that having an AI policy is a requirement, right? And I think, frankly, a lot of companies probably don't have that, but that's pretty straightforward. Are there other things that surprise your customers when they actually have to adhere to something?
A big challenge with really any compliance framework is that it cannot be grafted onto the company by the security and compliance team. That's just really not possible to do. ISO 42001 requires the commitment of top management, which is the individual or individuals who direct the operations of the organization at the highest level. So you can't come in and bolt on an AI management system. It does need to be built into how you do business as a company. And if you don't have executive support, it's going to be challenging to get all the requirements done, get the executives to participate in the operation, in the readiness exercise, and maintain the management system over time. So it requires it does require a substantial amount of effort. I think if you do it correctly, the effort will pay off. Where I think it doesn't pay off is if you build kind of a paper compliance system or a checkbox compliance system where you're kind of keeping, two separate sets of books and, we show this to the auditors and but this is how we actually do business. That's not really helping anyone. It's kind of waste of time. So I would advise companies to operationalize their AI management system. And that's obviously how we advise our clients and what we do.
Yeah, and then I think, in fairness, you could say that against about almost any standard. If
Sure.
you're not integrating into your business practices, then it's just something on the shelf and it doesn't buy you anything anyway. Curious if you can prognosticate where the standard's going. Is it evolving periodically? Do you envision it, maybe going the way of a SOC 2 or CMMC, where it kind of grows and becomes fairly complex, but then almost fundamentally a requirement for certain businesses?
I definitely expect to see a growth in ISO 42001 certification as companies leverage AI as part of their products. I think the standard will need to evolve over time. ISO 27001 has gone through numerous revisions over time, the most recent in 2022. ISO 42001 came out in 2023, and I think that the structure is sound. I think there are some potential issues in terms of duplication, overlap of some of the requirements that will need a hard look when it comes up for revision. But I think the approach of taking a high level view of the requirements is something that will make it more resilient to change because it's not highly technically dependent.
Okay. Uh, out of curiosity, is there a review date set for it that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of now.
No. Okay. So reasonably, I'll put it this way, reasonably safe for somebody to actually start working on 40,001 today without a lot of risk of substantive changes in the near future.
I would say so. At the same time as ISO 42001 or subsequent to it, some other supporting documents came out. For example, ISO 5338 focused on AI lifecycle, ISO 23894 focused on AI risk management, ISO 42005 focused on impact assessment. So there's been a lot of material that ISO has been putting out with respect to AI that supports the ISO 42001 standard. So there's been a lot of material put out there.
Okay. Um, and you mentioned, which I think makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that it's particularly important in regulated industries, and you mentioned a couple of those. Um, have you found? I guess where have you found the uh, maybe the most business for you? Was it in the AI user space? Is it in sort of the producer space? What companies seem most interested in this?
For us, the sweet spot for our customers are health tech companies that are rolling out AI products, either customer facing or they're using AI on data to support their own workforces. That is a very hot and growing area. Financial technology companies also very important for similar reasons because they want to move fast. They want to be able to turn their data into value for users, but they also have regulatory requirements that they need to abide by. And then there are B2B SaaS companies that are more focused on the enterprise trust side of things. And ISO 42001 is a, a boon to them.
And maybe my last question. This is something that always comes up whenever you start talking audits, which is how much effort is it potentially to go through to get yourself in a position where you can be audited, maybe from start to finish, and uh, roughly what's the time frame? Does it take a year for a company to go through this? Can you do it more quickly?
StackAware can get customers ready for ISO 42001 in 90 days. That requires a brisk pace by customer team members and making sure that we have all the information we need, but it definitely can be done. And then I usually say that a realistic conservative timeline from 0 to certification would be 6 or 7 months. So that would be my recommendation.
So honestly, then maybe a little shorter than some of the other standards that are out there. I mean, I'm more familiar with 27,001. We do a lot of CMMC work. I mean, a bunch of these things take a year, multiple sometimes. This sounds a little less onerous than that. Then
ISO 42001 has 38 Annex A controls compared to, I think, 93 for ISO 27001. So it is a potential lighter lift in that respect. That's definitely something to note, especially if you already have a 27001 management system, because the structure is going to be very familiar for you.
yeah, that would make sense. And usually there's some amount of overlap with these standards as well. Um, so it's, yeah, I'm glad that we bumped into each other because it certainly we do a lot of the AI. I'll call it the AI security work, right? Data privacy, some of the data labeling, things like that. Um, Working with clients to talk about setting up their AI policies, but we haven't really worked specifically to move somebody into 42001. And it's not really, frankly, it's not even coming up a lot. So I'm assuming that there's, probably some of those regulated industries are a bit of the driver. Uh, but I would expect we'll start to see more and more requirements just for, companies that are heavily utilizing it, even if it's a third party product that they're integrating. I'm sure there are requirements built into 42001 to actually sort of oversee that process as well.
Absolutely.
Uh, Anything as we look to wrap up that you might want to add or feel we didn't touch on adequately today?
I think with the wave of AI regulation that has been coming out, especially in the United States, it's important to understand how ISO 42001 fits in. So ISO 42001 is not a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination. It gives you a system for incorporating a wide range of regulatory requirements into your management system. Interestingly enough, though, Some states, like Colorado, have specifically called out ISO 42001 compliance as giving you safe harbor under certain circumstances if you're found in violation of the law. So that's an interesting development. I think it's unique to Colorado at this point, but it's an interesting trend to see.
Okay, so there's maybe some other good reasons to start to move in their direction as well. Then, yeah, and I mean, and let's face it, almost every company is exploring AI, even if they aren't sort of mature in the way that they use it. Uh, and with all of the, I guess I'll call it hype around it, I think organizations feel a pressure to find ways to utilize AI. And so, I would expect this to become a much more top of mind framework for for security professionals. It doesn't sound like it's purely a security related framework at all. But I would guess we'd start to see this surface a lot more now.
I think so.
Uh, well, Walter, I appreciate you joining. I appreciate spending some time on essentially a framework that I know people are going to start paying more and more attention to. I expect we'll probably ask you to come back at some point as we get some feedback here around complexities, challenges, who should take advantage of it. But as always, I always say if anybody's got questions, I'm happy to either be the central conduit and get you Walter. It's clear enough who Walter is, so you can reach out to him. But if there's interest, I'm happy to have a follow up on this conversation, and hopefully people got some value out of today. So, Walter, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Jason.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.